Welcome back to the Fitness, Wellness, and Longevity Podcast. This is episode 135. Today, Scott and I got to talk about why we get sick after training cycles and the stresses that we put on our bodies during training cycles, how to prevent getting sick after training cycles, and implementation of strategies and methodologies to tell whether or not you should be training or not. Guys, if you like this podcast, please subscribe, rate, and review, and enjoy episode 135. Scott, how goes it?
I'm doing okay.
Yeah, before we got on, Scott was describing his maladies as he went on a little trip back home to see his mother, and he was a bit under the weather there, Scott, eh?
Yeah, I've been having a lingering cold that usually I knock them out. They're pretty mild, but just, a couple of days we've been hanging on. And my son and I went to visit my mom down at the coast, and I'd only been there maybe 2 or 3 hours. I just started to feel a lot worse.
Wow.
And by evening, I was shivering, and I had a brutal fever all night. You just can't sleep. It was so bad. Thankfully, by this, the next day, yesterday, I was feeling quite a bit better, and the fever dissipated. But yeah, the old thing, when your body takes time to rest, then it just shuts down. And
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's very interesting. And I know I've seen that before myself, whether it's competitions or training cycles. And then as soon as you kind of allow yourself to deload, that's when this nasty, I call it overtraining flu comes in. But have you seen that in yourself and some of the clients that you work with there, Scott?
Oh, yeah, so many. I mean, it's, I think we all think it's fluke at some point, and then you realize, no, that just happens too routinely. Yeah, I don't know how many times I've typically not been a very sickly person, which actually can be a problem. If you never get sick, that probably means you're just running around in full sympathetic drive, 24/7 kind of thing. And I would notice that, why do I always get sick when I go on vacation? Or back in the day when I had a real job and often worked 6 days a week, I was always kind of on one hand, I was like, I never use sick leave, but I would always I still was brutally sick from time to time, but it always was on that one day I had off. Anyway, yes, I've seen it with athletes at the end of after a contest or after you complete, a rough patch. I don't know how many times I have clients that have demanding jobs where they get through whatever phase where, reports are quarterly, whatever is, due, and then they think they're going to go back to, put their focus on their training and make progress, but there's always this big recovery phase because they always get sick and wiped out as soon as whatever that work project is over.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, for me personally, that's happened a bunch of times in terms of training cycles and that kind of stuff. And usually, one thing that adds to it is like at the end of the training cycle, you're like, oh, it's time to really be really lenient and let kind of go a little bit, let some inflammatory foods into your diet, maybe get a little less sleep because you're enjoying yourself, have a few drinks or whatever. I know for me personally, having those few drinks, that's basically the nail in the coffin. Like my body just doesn't cooperate with alcohol anymore. I'll wake up the next morning with a sore throat. And depending how severe it is, I'll be run down for anywhere from a day to a week, just feeling that upper respiratory sinus deal for that amount of time.
Yeah. Makes it not fun.
No, not at all. It's like so not worth it anymore. Like I'd rather. There was a very prolific middleweight boxer who boxed until the age of 48 years old. I think maybe even 50 years old. His name was Bernard Hopkins. But like one of the things that he had said about the longevity of his career was after he got done with a fight, he wasn't going out onto the strip in Las Vegas and celebrating with his friends. He was back in the hotel, hot tub, soft tissue work, whatever, because he realized that it wasn't about that, 12 rounds that he just fought. It was more about the fact that he was in a training program or, he was training for a fight for the last 3 months and he was beating down his body for that entire amount of time with the stress of cutting weight, of, those rounds in the ring and then going through this immense war. He realized like, dude, I can't do that right now. Like if I'm going to be doing this for the long term, I'm going to have to actually treat my body well, regardless if I think I need a break in some kind of like satisfactory way or not.
Right. Yeah. How much does that add to the overall load from an event, this post-celebration and letdown possibly?
Yep.
Yeah. Yes, I've certainly done that a few times over the years myself, complete a gnarly whether it was training for something, or sometimes, you put the final cap on one of these bike projects, where you've been beating yourself up for months to get everything, and you finally get that last thing ticked. And then you're like, all right, time to, and then you're just really wiped out.
That kind of brings me to a cool little question, Scott. Like, if we were to kind of make a little like how-to guide, what would be like one of your major, let's just try to think of like 3 ways that you're overreaching. Like, I think that's one of the most valuable things that I would reteach myself if I were to restart this entire process of training and accomplishing athletic goals. What would be one of your top ways of telling that you're overreached in a training cycle, Scott?
Wow. Yeah. I've played with lots of ways to attempt to monitor, and some of them, I don't think are as useful as maybe we hoped when we started necessarily. I would say of all the various metrics I've tracked over the years, the one that is pretty reliable is just a well-designed but a very basic subjective questionnaire. If you answer it honestly, how you feel, how did you sleep, what's your general soreness or tightness level, what's your mood, willingness to train. If you answer those 5 or 6 questions honestly, and you look at the number there, that will usually kind of give you an indication, especially if it's trending, trending negatively.
Yeah, so I guess in general, it may not be a single day. It's like filling this out on a regular basis and seeing what those, relatively objective measurements look like. So if you're like, if every day is always a 3 out of 3, and then all of a sudden it's like 3 2s and then a few 1s, it's like, okay, wait a second. Now it's time to maybe reel it back in before we go too far off the edge.
Yeah, that's one. And then this is sort of wrapped into this, but this is could be looked at as just a separate metric. I know personally for me is paying attention to my sleep quality. That does seem to be the first thing that will go south if I'm pushing too hard in training or stress overall. But it does seem to be sensitive to training for sure.
Yeah, definitely. I know for me, one of the top 3 things would be sleep as well. Waking up in the middle of the night, like hungry or just like wide awake. I'm just getting that big cortisol dump in the middle of the night.
Yeah.
That's just one of the ways that I know. I'm like, oh shit, like what I've been doing has been very stressful on me. And again, it's not maybe that the training itself is overly stressful, but my body isn't compensating for it. Right. So either I'm I'm doing too much in my training, or I'm doing under recovering, which means, hey, am I working too much? Am I not, shutting off after training? Am I not eating enough? All those things are usually an indicator.
Yeah, and it's honestly tricky. It really is. Just this last thing here really, to me, illustrates it, because it was a deload week, and I did end up riding a fair amount more just than I planned, and I didn't even realize I rode 6 straight days. It was kind of because there's a couple of days I wasn't expecting to be able to ride just because my schedule was too busy, but then I had some cancellations, and then the weather also turned out to be unusually nice. And it wasn't until the end of the week I was like, oh, I guess I actually kind of pushed myself too hard there without even realizing it. But it didn't feel that hard. But I think we can become attuned to the grind, whatever that is, in our own training and our own occupations. And you get accustomed to this baseline level, but it's doesn't necessarily always reflect the internal load that we actually are putting ourselves through. And we've gone numerous times over say heart rate variability, which I think is useful in some avenues for sure, but not surprisingly, if you're that individual like I just described, where you're used to a baseline of a pretty good amount of training stress, and you're used to a baseline of a pretty heavy occupational or family workload, most likely your HRV is not changing much day to day. Doesn't mean that you're necessarily still 100% well and all is in a great spot. It's not going to change that much because you're very accustomed to it. So it wouldn't necessarily give you any indication. So I've seen that numerous times. One reason why after all these, I'm down to, I only measure myself 3 times a week. So I figure it gives me somewhat of a snapshot. Because I just, outside of certain very outlier things like, all day endurance efforts or something, I don't see any disruption that I can really track from it.
Yeah, I think there's also been somewhat of a refinement in terms of the HRV stuff, and I know that the testing is a little bit more objective rather than subjective in terms of like when people are doing it, and so there's some devices that will allow you to test even before you're awake. So it's like the last 5 minutes before you wake up, it'll test your HRV. So it's pretty much like you can't game it.
Can't game it. Yeah. Yeah, I think some of those newer methods might be more valuable, and I haven't delved into any of the like the overnight wearables or tracking that way. So that might be something to explore.
Yeah, there's
more
also
in the future. Yeah, because you can certainly game a little bit. You can try to draw your breaths out, and especially if you have a pretty good idea how to turn on that parasympathetic switch. Yeah. And I think I probably do that somewhat subconsciously.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think we've gone ad nauseum into the subconscious desire to train, and our us trying to game those tests. But I know me, pretty objectively, one of my biggest ones to tell if I should be training or not is, do I have a desire to train?
Yeah, that's a great one here.
Because I think more often than not, when I just don't feel like training, that's when I try to force it. That's when I will be in that overtrained state, overreach state, and end up, doing more harm than good.
Yeah, I absolutely think so. Yeah, that has if you're honest with how you feel. And I like that, and I'll sometimes try to warm up a little bit if it's a day like that.
Yep.
Because sometimes that goes well, but there's definitely days that it doesn't seem to help much at all. And anymore, I'll write that day off or do one single light set of something very similar to what I was going to do and call it a day there. And usually, next day is great.
Yeah, it's just if you string too many days together that are those overtrained type days where you're just pushing, it just gets very, very you get further and further down the rabbit hole, and the time that you would end up having to take finally gets there, and whether you wanted to or not, whether you're injured or sick or whatever, and then you end up having to take much more time off anyway. So my advice, I guess, to my 24-year-old self would be, as soon as you start feeling under the weather or you start feeling down, change things up. And I think that's one thing that you can do earlier on as you're trying to get in that overreached state, is you don't necessarily have to shut it down completely, but you could change the volume and intensity of the programs and maybe keep it a little bit more fun, work on your weaknesses, but in a very fun, light setting, and not have to be on sympathetic, training session that provides you with way too much stress than your body can handle.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think a lot of times we have to ask, what is the overall purpose of our training? And if we're, training for health or longevity, or even if we are training for a competition that maybe is a long way down the road, I mean, we probably don't want to be going into one of these overreaching cycles that's designed for someone with a very specific competition and a date that's, nearby. If we're training for health and performance, we probably really don't ever need to push to that goal, to that level. And if our competition isn't really very close, we probably don't want to be flirting with it too much either. Or you can end up, you're much more likely to end up setting yourself back than you are, giving yourself this extra boost, I think.
Absolutely. And I think, there's use of an overreached state, but I think, especially like you said, in populations where it's more important for people to feel good and longevity, they go to that well way too often, right? So like it's the same kind of thought of like high intensity training. Like yeah, it's useful,
Mm-hmm.
but if that's the only methodology that you're using, you're just going to basically grind yourself down, and then you're not going to make any progress. So yeah, it's a tool, but if you do that tool way too many times, then your body's gonna lose the ability to adapt to that stress, right? And I think that's again an underlying principle of all of this stuff is it takes a long time for an athlete to develop. I mean, I've been doing this for 10 years at some kind of level, right? And I'm only now starting to actually feel the adaptations that I've been training for over the last 10 years in terms of like us in a sustainable, like I've have it now, like it's part of my DNA ability,
Yeah, no, yeah, absolutely. It takes a long time, and even people that seem like they have very quick rises, it's usually built on stuff that was similar that they've been doing for a long time, and they were able to make the kind of more of a lateral jump.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's the reason why you see endurance athletes peaking in the mid 30s and not, when they're 22. It just takes a copious amount of reps and training hours for you to really make the adaptations, unless there are some, other means that are going on, whether they're legal or illegal relative to the sport.
Right. Yeah. You do see very, very few dominant young endurance athletes. It's so much long-term development to get to those upper levels.
Or they'll start out at shorter distance stuff where speed becomes more of a factor. They'll start like let's say a 5K, and then they'll end their career in the half marathon or the marathon. And then all of a sudden you see, okay, cool. That's really what all of that endurance and speed work was building toward.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yep. Yeah. With the speed being more age dependent, typically, you can excel a little sooner there. And then as you adapt and build, you just extend the duration for sure.
My roommate actually got done with a competition. It was like 4 or 5 events in a single day. He did a training cycle leading up to it and ended up winning the competition. And then took Sunday off, and then kind of like trained a little bit on Monday and tried to get into the gym on Tuesday. And it was a complete disaster. And he was like, I'm done. He's like, I'm done for a while. He's like, I'll pick this back up in like May or something like that. But, this was earlier in the month of April. And he's like, I just can't, like, I've gone way too far past where I can just get back into this thing. And I think we get caught up, especially in the sport of fitness, with all these people who literally do the CrossFit games. And then like Monday, they're back to training, or Tuesday, they're like doing conditioning. It's just like, there's a lot of other factors that people don't see going on. And I think that definitely interferes with what the actual training needs to look like and the proper periodization of athletes in order to maximize their long-term success in the sport.
Yeah, absolutely. There's always some outliers out there you can pick, but I probably argue that the people that are training hard, 2 days after the CrossFit Games may not have all that long of a career.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I realize, some folks can recover spectacularly quickly, but that's probably not the norm. That's not the ticket to. Then they're able to do that more,
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, it's more for obviously coaches to kind of bring that awareness toward athletes, because athletes kind of only can see the short term, right? Mm-hmm. They want to do this season. This is the season that they have to make it, but they don't realize like that this season going for it could potentially ruin your career. There are a lot of athletes who make it once and then that's it. They're one and done and they got nothing left.
Yeah. Yeah. We've seen a lot of people just come and go like that.
Yep. The other thing that definitely is a marker for me personally is appetite. Like not having an appetite anymore. Like your body's basically in such a depleted state that you can't even muster up basic functions of like vigor, hungry, happy, horny, so to speak.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that one, in fact, from James Fitzgerald, always remember that one as a good indicator that you're ready to get back at it after whether it's a training cycle or a competition. You want to get back to that baseline, and for a lot of people, don't get to that spot very often.
Yeah, and again, it's something that you learn in time and you learn with your body. And, I think one of the most biggest factors of resiliency within the sport is being able to just put away calories. You know what I mean? Being able to put in 4 to 5 hours of training in a day, but then also put back the amount of calories that you need and actually digest it so that you can fuel those training sessions instead of just basically putting a hole in the bottom of your gas tank and trying to drive around and just keep filling it up. You know what I mean?
You're right. Yeah.
You're like in an auto race, and all of a sudden you have a hole in your gas tank. You do your 20 laps, put more food in, more fuel in, and hopefully you'll get around the track again. But there are some people who are just a little bit different, and they're drinking peanut butter, they're drinking milk and eating peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, and they're just fine with it. They digest well, they sleep well, and you just know that they're adapted to the sport a little bit better.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. If you can't fuel your efforts here, so you're in a losing battle. Yeah, and then you have that, like what you mentioned earlier too. You get that whole, you get a little overreach, you lose your appetite, you just keep soldiering on, now under fueling, and just sort of a catch-22.
Running off adrenaline.
Yeah, a lot of people get to that spot.
So now that we've kind of assessed, like, what are some of the ways that we can tell that you're overtrained? When you are overtrained, Scott, what are some of the, or overreached, let's say, what are some of the ways that we can kind of get ourselves back into more homeostasis and potentially back into a place where we can get back into a regular training regimen?
It would generally depend on if you're parasympathetically overreached or sympathetically overreached. You will typically, if you're a strength or power athlete, it's probably more sympathetic overreaching. If you're more of a pure endurance athlete, it probably would be more parasympathetic. But generally, with the strength power athlete, you're going to reduce the intensity quite a bit. So you could potentially still get in and get some lifts in, but you're going to go, stay way back of failure, lighter loads than usual, just groove the pattern, accrue an amount of volume, but not as much as you had planned, and that may allow you to get back on track. And then if you had the other way around, endurance athlete, you would need to cut the overall volume. You may still be able to get away with some shorter workouts and even possibly a little higher intensity than what you might have normally done.
Mm-hmm.
But it needs to be significantly shorter volume. Group sport like CrossFit being sort of a mixed of those two, it tends there more to sympathetic overtraining, I think, in most cases. So you would take the first recommendations.
Yeah, and it's almost like you got to get those people out of the gym. They're so addicted to being to the gym, and just get them out, get them some sun, let them hang out, maybe play, do some beach volleyball if you can, do some bike riding, and just kind of get that grind mindset off for a little bit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, finding something that's just kind of unstructured and you don't have a serious, like a emotional attachment to in the same way as it was. Yeah. I think that is maybe one of the things that drains people, maybe as much as the physical grind is sometimes the emotional mindset around it. There's always.
Yeah. I think that's definitely part of it. And I think the only way of kind of getting yourself out of that is actually stepping away for a few days, a week, whatever it might be, getting out of the gym, doing some fun stuff, doing some play, go rock climbing, go go-karting, keep it physical, because I think we've discussed before that I think that people can get very depressed when they're not doing physical activity, when they have such a reliance on physical activity as their outlet.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, passive rest, I don't think is often very helpful. You end up like me, getting sick immediately. Yeah, outdoor fun stuff. And I get that. Like, I have a difficult time just going on a hike sometimes when I think I could be, accomplishing and some new skills on the bike, for example. It's like,
yeah. And again,
but you got to get away from that once in a while, or you ultimately either get burned out or get injured or something.
And again, this is for those who feel like they're overreached. This isn't overtrained or adrenal fatigue. This is not going to fix that, I don't think, right. Scott?
Probably not. Yeah, it'd just be the one of the many things that you're probably going to need to do at that point.
Yeah.
But yeah, this is just where exactly. We're talking about kind of short term, nothing too serious yet, but just a way to kind of get yourself right the ship and get back on track.
And the reason I mentioned that is because a lot of people who are, kind of not being honest with themselves, or maybe don't have enough awareness, is that like, oh, I'm okay. I've been doing my Epsom salt baths and eating more, and I'm good to train. It's like, have you been able to get a hard on in the last, month? Are you getting sleep? Like, what's your HRV score has been looking like? And all those indicators are like very low. But I've been doing my recovery and I took a couple days off. It's like, no. Like, for those athletes and individuals, like, that's the point where there's almost no return, and we got to actually shut it down, potentially see some functional medicine practitioners, and get you back into being healthy before we go back into getting into training. Right, Scott?
Yeah, right. Yeah. That's, once you get that far, it can be a rough, long road to get out of it.
Yeah, and I can attest to that myself.
Yeah, I think at some point we probably all have done that to ourselves.
Yeah, I think you don't know until you know. So I think that's important. Obviously, denial is a very powerful thing, but being able to spot it in other people, and then be able to curtail people from that position in very clever ways, I think is very powerful as a coach.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sometimes you have to kind of slip in recovery stuff to keep people on track without necessarily, giving away the whys and whatever.
Yep, exactly right. Well, I know that you're a bit of a time crunch today, Scott. You got anything else for today?
No, that's it, and we'll see how next week is doing on recovery.
Yeah, hopefully you're feeling a little bit better. But guys, if you like this podcast, please subscribe, rate, and review. Scott, how can we get a hold of you?
Scott Hagnes. I am Scott at CrossFitPortland.com.
And I'm Sean LaFlock. You can get me at Sean at CrossFitDartyBeach.com. Scott, have a great week, man.
Yeah, you too. Take care.
Later, buddy.
All right. Talk to you later.
Bye.